So look, I hope what we're doing tonight is the most important session of the class. It's very strange, but we knew the Damascus Document for 100 years, but we couldn't place it in any context. And by the way, it doesn't matter what you call it. You know, some people originally called it Zadokite fragments. Then some called it, you know, the Zadokite rule, the Damascus rule. Finally, the Damascus Document that I laid claim to being one of the first to employ. No thanks for my colleagues for that, I don't believe. But in any case, it just made sense to call it the Damascus Document. It's not a rule, it's a document. Why would anyone call it a rule? That's just stupid. But the point is that the Damascus Document is full, complete, except for the stuff that we've now found precedes, and there's some more material that follows it. So, but what we have from the Cairo Geza is an extremely good copy, and now after being able to see the parallels, which is why it was so important to be able to see the parallels, in page 4, we know that the Geza material is just about absolutely accurate. So whoever copied the Geza material really had a very good copy that they were copying. Now, how it got into the Cairo Geza, that's your guess as well as mine. So without any more wasting time about that, let's continue where we were. We were on column 4, and of course that's an extremely important column. It was preceded by this history of Israel, using the word cut off and delivered up. Mostly delivered up to the sword, but delivered up is a very familiar phrase from the Gospels. Judas Iscariot delivered up Jesus at the conference. One was asking about that we had down there. Last week, one of the experts on the Gospel of Judas wanted to make the point that the New Testament never says Judas betrayed Jesus. It only says he delivered him up, which is true. Ludemann, I think, was making that point from Germany, if you've heard of him. But in any case, yeah, that's obvious. Betray is our equivalent. But that's why you often have to go back to the Greek or the Hebrew to be sure about these things. But here we have delivered up, cut off. I showed you where Paul's using the language to cut off and so on. And these are friends of God and heirs to the covenant forever. And then at the end of this, but God and his marvelous mysteries, line 18 of column 3, atoned for their sin, forgave them their iniquities, and built this house of faith that never stood from ancient times until now. And those that hold fast to it hold fast again, very important, to what? Both to the law and this house of faith. There will, you know, in the letter of James, you are saved by works and faith working together. And for them that hold fast to it, there will be victorious life, and all the glory of Adam will be theirs. The glory of Adam we're going to hear in other contexts in the scrolls. But I think it relates, who knows what the glory of Adam is? It's not something that's ever been defined. But if you look at the Pseudo-Clementines, the Jewish Christians, the Ebionites so-called, and we've discussed the Pseudo-Clementines sufficiently, I think, in this class that we don't need to keep on saying what they are. But if you look at the Pseudo-Clementines, the primal Adam is one of the principal doctrines, and don't ask me what it means. Only it's a kind of incarnationist ideology that Jesus is the last Adam, and Adam was the first Adam, and Adam reappears in different generations. It's a sort of a Buddha doctrine. Frankly, I think Buddhism was moving west here. And I think Buddhism was influencing things here a bit. And you say, how is that possible? I don't know how that's possible. But I have a feeling some of these things are very much like, I mean, so many Christians have seen the similarity of the Christ doctrine to the Buddha doctrine that many Christians who became disillusioned with Christianity, particularly in the 50s and 60s, became Buddhists. Buddhist was really big for people who became disillusioned with Christianity. And I don't think, as Paul uses the term Christ, I don't think it's so different from the way Buddhists are using the term Buddha, the Buddha. I can't go any deeper into it than that. I don't have any information, but yes, we know that there were Buddhist teachers that got to Rome. I forget which of the early church historians talk about that in the 2nd century. And I think the primal Adam is an equivalent of that ideology in some way. You know the Islamic doctrine, the Imam. How many have heard of the Imam? The hidden Imam?
Yeah.
I go over this a lot in my James and my New Testament code book. The Imam. Well, as Shiism, I mean not Sunnism. I mean the Shiites and the Sunnis are at odds, as you know. And this Annapolis conference that's going on now is very much related to the willingness of the Sunnis to try to come to some accommodation on the Palestine-Israel problem, where the Shiites are not prepared to. It's a kind of an alliance being worked up of people who will oppose the Shiite and further Shiite incursion into these areas, because really Sunni Islam fears Shiite Islam much more than it fears Israel. Israel has already proved that it's never going to do anything to them anyway. It's just maybe messing about a bit in the area of Palestine, trying to recreate its old heritage there, but it's not threatening Mecca, it's not threatening Baghdad, it's not into expansionist things, it has no desire to destroy any Arab or Islamic country, it doesn't want to destroy the Islamic religion at all, but that's not the case with Shiism versus Sunnism. So a nuclear Shiitism is a very frightening thing to the Sunnis. I think that's a little bit of what's going on in Washington and Annapolis at the moment, though we don't see it because they don't tell us these things. But Shiism is based on this incarnation, this idea of the Imam. In Sunnism, the Imam doesn't have this aspect. So if you haven't taken an Islam course, you would get this in an Islam course. But the hidden Imam is the Imam that went into occultation and is supposed to return sort of like a Mahdi, a Messiah at the end of time, and Jesus is supposed to precede the coming back of the Imam. It's very complicated. It's in the Hadith literature. But Imam in Shiism is very similar to primal Adam in the Pseudo-Clementines, very similar to Buddha in Buddhism. It's an incarnation of perfection. And weird, it isn't Muhammad whose incarnation is supposed to be Ali, his nephew and or his cousin and son-in-law. But anyway, so watch Adam wherever you can in the scrolls, because it probably has more significance than we can understand. Because whoever heard All the Glory of Adam movie there was, what's the glory of Adam? Whoever heard of such a thing? I don't even know what it is. Yet we're talking about eternal life, or resurrection, or something like that. Living eternally. So the glory of Adam is yours and you live eternally. So Adam is not a normal atom, it's a super atom. Not super atom bomb, but super ADAM. So then we go into this Zadokite covenant, and that's column 4. This is a quote from Ezekiel 44:15. In any case, the priests are the penitents of Israel. Remember I told you that this is not the way Ezekiel 44:15 reads in the normative Bible, even in the Dead Sea Scrolls? That it's been broken open. How has it been broken open? That's why I want you to read the thing completely, not just listen to a lecture, but look at it in the document in front of you. How has it been broken open? Ands have been added where there were not ands before. So the normative, Ezekiel 44:15, I don't have a Bible in front of me, but you can look in your Bible, should read something like, the priests who are Levites of the son of Zadok genealogy, or something like that. In other words, they're all, I don't know if you know the word apositives. it's an appositive is something in apposition. These are all appositives. They are not conjunctions. They're not broken open with what we call in Hebrew vavs, W-A-W, ands. Vav constructs are added in here. And that is not normal. So these people are not above, just like the New Testament changes biblical passages to fit Jesus when they feel like changing something slightly. They change. I can't give you examples off the top of my head, but as I'm going through the Gospels, I can show you where they change it. I think something about Judas throwing the money into the treasury or something. That's supposed to be from, I don't know, Zechariah or something. And that's not the way it reads. Things like that are just changed when the authors want to, you know, use a biblical thing, but it isn't quite what they're looking for. So they fudge it up a bit, which again shows the closeness of the gospel type approach to this approach here, even though it's not recognizably similar. So, the sons of Zadok, the priests and the Levites and the sons of Zadok, 3 different quantities. That's what has been done. Why did they do that? Because they wanted 3 different quantities. Because they wanted to talk about 3 different things. They don't care really about priests, Levites, or sons of Zadok as such. It's what they are imputing to these terms that matter. You people who know something about priests in the Old Testament, this is not a normative definition of what a priest would be. Do you understand what I mean? A normative definition? It's not normal. A priest is genealogically descended from Aaron and Zadok and different things like that. You know, the sons of Aaron, these are supposed to be the priests, etc. But there's nothing about being a penitent for a definition of a priest. So it isn't even clear that these priests are genealogical. In other words, this may just be the people who went out in the wilderness. For you familiar with the New Testament, the followers of John the Baptist, for instance. I would think that the movement, as I said, you're in Death Valley here. You got one gold mine over here and another gold mine, you know, 500 yards or 2 miles down the hillside from it. These people all knew each other. You mean one group that's out in the wilderness are penitents of Israel and the other aren't? No, they're all penitents of Israel. So I would think that the followers of John the Baptist in the wilderness, who went out in the wilderness to see him shaking like a reed or whatever the New Testament describes, are penitents of Israel. And that's, if they were of Jewish background, that's how they would have been labeled. And you see, they went out from the land of Judah. Now, put your finger in there, and let's go over to column 6. There is another similar definition of the same thing. This has to do with digging the well. The diggers of the reason I close the windows because a lot of noise comes out of there sometimes when they're running down there. Sorry for it to get hot. You can open them a bit more if you're hot. If you look at column 6, and they dug the well, line 3, the well which the princes dug, which the nobles of the people dug. Now you've really got to translate these things precisely from the Hebrew, which is why I give you the Hebrew in this book, so that you can check if I'm doing it right. With the staff, and I give you the Hebrew in parentheses, those who have my book, mehokek. The reason is that mehokek is based on the Hebrew root hok. And the Hebrew root hok means law. So you can play with that. They love to play with words. You can say with an M-E at the beginning, etc., and put in this way, it's a staff. But in some other ways, it can be laws or lawgiver or something like that. And that's what they do with this definition here. They play with mehokek and make it into laws. In any case, and they dug the well. Now this quote is from Numbers 21:18. Now, the well is the Torah. Well, that tells you right away this is a law-abiding group, and it says Torah, not law. So if you have a translation that says law, it isn't, it says Torah, which is the first 5 books of the law, as you might know. The well is the Torah, and the diggers, that's in the thing, the people who dug the well, are the penitents of Israel. Oh, we heard that before. So the diggers and the priests are parallel. You see what you can do with this? I don't know if you catch it. That's why this document is so important, because it's complete for us. That's why I wish every one of you had a copy of it in front of you to watch it. Because it's so important to be able to make these connections and not listen to some idiot lecture, but to look at the document itself and make your own, evaluation of it. The well is the Torah, its diggers are the penitents of Israel. And what did they do? They went out from the land of Judah to dwell in the land of Damascus. What did they do back here? Let's see. The priests are the penitents of Israel who went out from the land of Judah. But there's more description over here, isn't there? To dwell in the land of Damascus. So, is that just, yeah, I'm sure that's just they didn't have time to write that in, they didn't feel like just writing, but that's what's going on. So we're having it twice described here. One in terms of the sons of Zadok, right? And the other in terms of the diggers, the ones who dug the well. That's why I have a chapter in my New Testament code. I call it the well of living waters. I think I have several. I love these allusions that most people who just talk about paleography and archaeology because they don't read the documents very well, just forget about. So, for instance, in this book I have here, Re-erecting the Fallen Tent of David and the Fountain of Living Waters, the Star Who Came to Damascus, and the Song of the Well. Those are 2 chapters in this book. No one has ever written about the star who came to Damascus in any detail, and no one has even noticed that there's a Song of the Well. What do you mean there's a Song of the Well? Yes, it says sing out to the well. You people who know your Bible, where is singing out to the well talked about? Isaiah. It's from the prophet Isaiah. That's why I said what we're talking about today is really the crux of the Dead Sea Scrolls outlook. All the rest is, icing on the cake. You see, we found lots of materials there, but we already had the main document anyway. We just didn't know what it was and where to plug it in. That's great. See if you watch when we come to the Song of the Well. And I think it's around Isaiah 50-something or other. N.T.will are also mentioned in Isaiah 50-something or other. It's all in my New Testament code book. I can't pull all that stuff back out. It's in the chapters that I write about that in this other book here. Okay, so going back here to column 6 still. So they went out. Why is the land of Damascus so important? Because that's where they raised the new covenant in the land of Damascus in column 6 and column 8. That's where they raised the new covenant in the land of Damascus. And we want to know about the new covenant in the land of Damascus, don't we? Because we're familiar with another new covenant, the cup of the new covenant in the blood of Christ, aren't we? That's where all these parallels, linguistic and language parallels, come into play. So why did I make you read all that stuff at the beginning of the class? And I would have gone more into Josephus had I had time. To let you see, do you think this is happening in the 2nd and 1st century, or do you think this is happening BC, or do you think this is happening in the 1st century AD? And in my view, the language parallels are all from the 1st century AD, not from anything we heard in, the Maccabees may have gone out and fought in the wilderness a bit. Judas went out and lived in the wilderness and ate nothing but wild plants. That's a sort of archetypical, maybe, moment. Okay, let's finish column 6 here so we can go back to column 4. For which reasons God called them all princes, because they sought him. Princes is in the thing here, is in the quote. The well which the princes dug. So the diggers and the princes and the priests are all the same. But this is more detailed. Because they sought him with a whole, because they sought him, seeking God is very important. And their honor was questioned by no man. And the staff, the Mehokek, he is the interpreter of the Torah. We'll hear about that more. He will go to Damascus. He's the star who went to Damascus. He's the interpreter of the Torah, of whom God said, of whom Isaiah said, he creates an instrument for his works. Yeah, here we're getting into the Isaiah 50s, Isaiah 54:16. And the nobles of the people, again in the previous passage, are those who came to dig the well with the staves. And now staves, I put in parentheses, is hukim, playing on laws, which the staff decreed. That's great. The hukim, which the mehokek hakak. Hakak is the verb, mehokek is the noun, and the hukim are, so they're playing with the hook here. That this is the righteous, or the interpreter of the law, let's just leave it like that. It's pretty interpreter of the Torah. And that's great stuff. The hukim, which the mehokek hakak. It's all poetic in Hebrew, it's all playing on words and so on. That they should walk in during the era of evil, and without which they would not persevere until the standing up of he who pours down or teaches righteousness at the end of days. Well, I don't know who that is. He who's going to stand up, be resurrected. Stand up can be, in Ezekiel, be resurrected. It can also mean come. It can also mean rise. But I think here it's resurrected. He who will pour down. That means, I think if I'm not mistaken, I have to look at the Hebrew, I don't have it right in front of me. Instead of the More Zedek, who is the righteous teacher, or the teacher of righteousness, More Zedek. Oh, these things dry out. I'll try this one. I'll cover this one over to get the fluid back into it. Pardon my vulgarity, guys. I thought we did some funny food tonight. Okay, here we go. Now, if you got some backup ones, I'll probably need them. More Zedek, or it's really hot Zedek, which is, this is the More Zedek means teacher of righteousness, or righteous teacher. Teacher of the righteousness. The teacher of the righteousness. Or anyway, this other one is your 8-7, which is pour down righteousness. I don't think that they're different, but in any case, he who pours down righteousness at the end of days, whoever this is, infuriating code, you see. So, but all who have been brought into the covenant shall not enter the temple to kindle its altar in vain. Rather they shall be barrers of the door, just as God said, who among you shall not bar its door, nor should you light my altar in vain, quoting Malachi 1:10. But you see, at one point in the book of Acts, Paul is in the temple, if you recall, and the crowd starts yelling, this is the man that teaches against our people, against our religion, against this place all over Asia. Now he's introduced non-Jews into the temple or something like that. And they all sort of jump on him, but we're supposed to sympathize with Paul, which we do. Okay, that's the narrative. And then they throw him out and they bar the door, it says in Acts. And they bar the door behind him. Who will not bar the door? Now, I don't say that necessarily means that they're related, but there's parallel things going on there. One is the opposite of the other. That is, you shouldn't have people who are, impure or anti-Moses or things like that, and entering the temple to kindle its altar in vain. See, this is a very law-oriented, Torah-oriented document. You say, well, I don't like that. I'm not Torah-oriented. Okay, but we're not worried about what we like. We're just worried about what it is. This is an argument. It's not a matter of which side we're on and which we feel is better or more suits our present life. You want to be sleeping with people in their periods one way or the other, that's fine. You go ahead and do that. We're not against it or for it. If this document is against it, fair enough. But the point being, we're just trying to see who's into what and who's into the other thing, that's all. And what the parallels are. So here, we have this barring the door, and I mentioned that's in Acts 21:30. If they do not keep, that is the commandments, to do, here's that doing, line 14 of column 6, according to the precise letter of the Torah. You have to do not one jot or tittle Torah. Not one jot or tittle shall pass away from the law. In the New Testament, at one point, Jesus says, until all these things are accomplished. If you break one small point of the law, you're guilty of breaking it all, says James in the letter of James. I'm not for it or against it. I don't keep the law. I told you that. I break it all the time. So I don't have an action that's conflict in terms ideologically speaking. But I want to emphasize what this group is about. To do, be a doer, letter of James says, according to the precise letter of the Torah in the error of wickedness. And again, to separate from the sons of the pit. To keep away from, and that's lehinazir. To keep away from is the same language James uses in Acts 15 when he gives his rulings to overseas communities. Keep away from fornication, things sacrificed to idols, blood and strangled things. Repeated 3 times. Keep away from. Now we see the Hebrew root. And guess what it's based on? Something that you're very familiar with. NZR. Why would it be based on a root NZR? What other word do you know that is based on the root NZR? Not Nazir. Nazirite. Why? Because a Nazirite keeps away from certain things. That's why he's a Nazir. And that's why early Christians were called Nazirites. And what we have here is to some, and Jesus was called a Nazirite, one of the Gospels says. And we have here actually what's being defined for you as a community of lifelong Nazirites. And if you look at the descriptions of James in early church literature, James is a Nazirite from his mother's womb, it says. And he wouldn't cut his hair. And he didn't, he wouldn't, there's all kind, a razor never came to his hair. I go through that in my book on James. Well, here it's using the NZR root. That's what's so important. You just read this in English, you don't get it. Or someone doesn't explain it, put a footnote. To do, according to the precise, that's what they're going into wilderness to do, to separate from the sons of the pit. Look, let me stop a moment. Let me run over to the community rule. Column 8. Do the rest of it. But look at column 8. When we're talking about the council of the community. What are they to do? They're to do truth, righteousness, love, piety, humility, love each man his neighbor, keep the faith in the land with steadfastness and humble spirit, atone for sin by doing judgment, just like Jesus, and suffering affliction. That's Jesus of the New Testament. And they shall walk with everyone according to the standard of truth in the essence of time, with the existence of these in Israel. The council of the community shall be established upon truth like an eternal plantation. There's that plantation language again. That's why all these documents hang together. You want to put this document in the 2nd century BC, and you can't put the other document in the 1st century AD. Vice versa. You want to put the other document in the 1st century AD, you got to put this document in the 1st century AD too. That's what the scholars who work on this stuff don't understand. Their pedagraphic sequences are meaningless. They're just a stab in the dark, a hope. But as against internal evidence of this kind, you just may have a conservative scribe writing a document as opposed to an innovative younger scribe or something. He doesn't tell you anything about when the document was written. If I take all your papers and throw them down on the floor here, all that it will tell me when I finally separate them out, and according to your handwriting, is who your teacher was to some extent that made you write your handwriting like that. It doesn't tell me anything particularly about when you wrote it particularly. In any case, think about that. A house of holiness for Israel. We heard about a house of faith. Now we're hearing about a house of holiness and the community rule and the foundation of the Holy of Holies for Aaron. So this community rule is is a symbolic temple. Remember, Jesus in the scripture says I will destroy this place and raise it up in 3 days. That he was not speaking about himself or something like that. He was not speaking about the temple, he was speaking about himself. That Jesus is the temple in Ephesians, who all enter and commune with and so on. Ephesians and other letters of Paul, Jesus is the temple. Well, so is this community council. And they're also, so the priests in it are the Holy of Holies for Aaron. The lay members of the council are the house of holiness. And what do? They are witnesses of the truth of judgment and the chosen or elect of his will to, and here we are again, to make atonement for the land. That's how the Christian religion portrays Jesus, to make atonement for the land. And to pay the wicked their reward. Oh, we're going to hear that again later on in the Habakkuk commentary and elsewhere. They pay the wicked their reward. We already heard it about the sons of Zadok. That they will stand, and I think something about they will condemn the wicked and justify the righteous. Here it's pay the wicked their reward. That'll be in the Habakkuk Pesher. They will be a tested rampart, a precious cornerstone. Anyone who knows the Gospels knows that's how Jesus presented in the Gospel imagery, a precious cornerstone. Also, at one point, the stone which the builders are rejected shall become the cornerstone. The foundation of which will not shake or sway in their place. Isaiah 28:16. It will be a dwelling of Holy of Holies for Aaron, with everlasting knowledge of the covenant of judgment, offering up a pleasing fragrance. Well, they are the pleasing fragrance. A house of perfection and truth in Israel, to establish an everlasting covenant of laws. And they will be an acceptable free will offering. Here we have it a third time. To atone for the land. They are the offering, the council. And render judgment. 2nd century BC, 1st century AD. You tell me. And there will be no more unrighteousness. When these have been confirmed in perfection of the way, the name of the way this group is going to behave, and it's going to be in all the documents, perfection of the way, for 2 whole years, by the foundation of the community. I think Paul at one point says he went into Arabia for 2 years, or was it 3? I can't remember. Then he came back to Damascus. In the letter to the Galatians, I can't remember exactly what he says. It was 2. Who can remember? Was it 2 or 3? Anyway, for 2 whole years, they will be set aside as holy within the council of the men of the community, and the guide, the blind guides who fall into the pit, will not hide from them any matter revealed by him, but hidden from Israel out of fear of a spirit of heresy. We don't know what these other laws they had were, because they had some secret laws. Maybe they said the law wasn't binding anymore. I don't know. And with the existence of these for a community in Israel, and according to these regulations, why am I reading all this? For what comes next. They shall separate from the midst of the habitation of the men of unrighteousness, to go into the wilderness to prepare the way of the Lord. As it is written, prepare in the wilderness the way of the Lord. Make straight in the desert a pathway for our God. Hey, come on. Where have we heard that before? The beginning of the Gospels. John the Baptist teaching. What? And then you're going to put this in the 2nd century BC, this document? Because someone said some of the handwriting looked early to them. A scholar at Harvard said he thought there was some early handwriting on some of the verses. Come on. You know, that's just the approach of a simpleton.
Exactly is that?
What have I been reading in column 8 of the community rule? Where's your book? Good. Oh, it's Vermes?
Yeah.
Oh. It's okay. He's not bad. Where there isn't a controversy. But anyway, column 8. Don't you see it? Line, see, that one doesn't have the numbers yet, but this is line 13, 14, and 15. This is the study of Torah. Oh, we heard about Torah in the Damascus Document. So all these documents hang together. There's a scholar at the University of Chicago called Norman Gold. He says, oh, the Dead Sea Scrolls are just an assortment of Jerusalem literature from the time that was put into the caves at Qumran. That's a good opposition theory, but it won't stand up to scrutiny. because these documents are all of a kind. They emphasize the same things, they use the same terminology, they have the same attitude. One document after another uses the same terms. This is a movement, and not a small movement either. It's a big movement, because it's a vast literature that got into the caves, all from one orientation, all from the orientation of this movement. So you know what I call this movement? The Messianic movement in Palestine. Others can call it Essenes, others can call them Zealots. Things slip, move, change. Some might call them Nazarites. These are also lifelong Nazarites. Why do I call them Messianic movement in Palestine? Because of all the Messianic imagery they're going to marshal in these documents. And we know there's a Messianic movement that finally goes out from Palestine, and through Paul and others like him, conquers the whole world. But it's not the Messianic movement we have here. It's an inversion, or a when something is turned into its mirror opposite. It's something like that. And that's why this literature is so incredibly important, but also so frightening. So it will be very important for people to misinterpret it. The more you can misinterpret it, the more you can reduce it, the more you can say it isn't important, the more you can say, oh, it's 2nd century BC, it's really not really anything to do with what we're talking about, the better you are at preserving what you know. I'm not saying people do it on purpose, it's just psychologically the way people work, that's the way people are. This is the study of Torah, which he commanded by the hand of Moses. That would make Paul squirm. To do, again, do, all that has been revealed from age to age, in which the prophets have revealed through his Holy Spirit. Holy Spirit, we know about that. And any man of the men of covenant who deliberately turns aside from any commandment on any point whatsoever, he who breaks one small point is guilty of breaking it all, is not to approach the purity of the men of holiness. That is a word used for food that is the purest of all kinds of eating material. And he shall know none of their doctrine until his works have been washed clean of all unrighteousness, and he once more walks in perfection of the way. Well, we're getting an idea of what they consider perfection of the way. We don't have to agree with it. We don't have to say that's speaking to me. We're not looking here for religious inspiration. We're looking here for historical understanding. Where's my friend here? I miss her. She's not here today. This is very important stuff, tell her. I will be sad that she missed it. In any case, if you go to column 9 of this document, the community rule, and with the existence, line 3, of these in Israel, according to all these regulations, the Holy Spirit shall then be established upon truth. Well, we've heard about the Holy Spirit in the New Testament. Forever. They shall atone for guilt and rebellious transgression, and be a pleasing sacrifice to the land. We heard about all of that. So it just goes on and on and on in that way. It talks about line 19, to walk perfectly each with his neighbor. We've heard about that, and all has been revealed to them. And it repeats again in case you didn't get it. For this is the time of making a way in the wilderness. And then it goes on finally. And these are the rules of the way for the guide who are blind guides, and the blind leading the blind, and all will fall into the pit, according to the Gospel of Matthew, right? And everything my heavenly Father has not planted shall be uprooted. The opposite of he caused the root of planting to grow. That was this community. Therefore he shall instruct them in all that is revealed that they shall do, to separate from any man who has not turned his way from all unrighteousness. And these are the rules of the way for the guide in these times, relating to both his loving and his hating. Everlasting hatred for the men of the pit. We've heard about the pit in Matthew already. The guides will fall into the pit, playing with the language here possibly. Right? You get it? I don't say you should agree with me. In the spirit of, so we know about the men of the pit. We're going to hear about the men of the pit in the Damascus document too. So the community rule, the Damascus document, I'm going from document to document here, are using the same language, just developing it more. I love the guide language here. And finally, rather he shall be as a man zealous for the law, and his time that of a man, I put it in parentheses because it's left out, zealous for the day of vengeance, to do all his will and all the work of his hands and in all his dominion as he commanded. These are also zealots. We have the zealot movement developing here in the first century. They are zealous for what? Zealous for the day of vengeance, which is another parallel to the day of judgment, but even more zeal, vengeance, not just judgment. We'll hear more about this vengeance, God's vengeance, in the beginning of the community rule, but I want to go back to column 6 of the Damascus Document. I hope that made sense, that little excursion I took for you. Yes, because they said that you should separate from all evil. And this one, when it starts to talk about going into the wilderness, it says, and you shall separate from all ungodliness and the men of the pit, etc., and go out in the wilderness and make the way of the Lord. So the two are parallel. That's why I was over there. Because it says, they shall do according to the precise letter of the Torah, line 14 of column 6. Oh, and here it is again. In the era of wickedness to separate from the sons of the pit. The pit. Again, the blind leading the blind, and both shall fall into the pit. Tell me the writers of those materials didn't know these materials here to some extent, and weren't playing with them. I believe they were playing with them, and disagreed with them, and were having a little fun at their expense, because they disliked this material so much. Yet they still wanted to be messianic. They wanted a different kind of messianism. And where's the pacifism here? Where are the peaceful Essenes contemplating in the wilderness? These are not peaceful people in the wilderness. These are very aggressive people. I just read you some of the most aggressive things you could imagine. The community rule is even more aggressive than the Damascus Document. Doesn't mean the same person wrote all these materials. But what did I just read you that sounded pretty aggressive to me? I can't find it exactly here, but everlasting hatred for the men of the pit and a spirit of secrecy. Well, there's no love lost here, and these shall be the rules for his loving and his hating. So you love some people, but you hate other people. You see, you don't love your enemy. That's another total opposition of this material and the material that we're familiar with. I'm not saying you should do either one. Although most people I know don't love their enemy. I didn't even meet many Christians who love their enemies. I know a lot of people don't love me. And I never met anyone who came and kissed me on the cheek or something like that, you know. I think most of us are more like these people here. We don't love, it's nice to love your enemy if you feel you can. I don't really feel I can love Saddam Hussein or Bin Laden or Hitler. I think I know what I need to do to those people. You know, so one is idealism. There's nothing wrong with it. It's beautiful. It's an idealistic, platonic, idealized universe. But in the midst of the Roman Empire, with all that evil, with all that pollution, with all that corruption, with all that brutality, with games in the Colosseum, with people being thrown to animals, with blood sports, and all that sort of thing, I'm supposed to love my enemies in a situation of that kind? You're asking a lot. Maybe the people asking it are more interested in keeping the Pax Romana, are interested in being part of the Pax Romana. Look, we know you people are offended, but look, no, let's just play ball a bit here. Turn the other cheek, etc., 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 etc. Maybe this is the Jesus of the Pax Romana. Maybe it's not the Palestinian Jesus. I don't know. I don't have the answers. You are. I'm introducing you to these questions that you can think about the rest of your lives, for good or for bad, as you wish. You know, I'm not going to parrot me or be a parrot. I'm just showing you what the real meaning of these documents is. And it's not just to be followed by, oh, the Dead Sea Scrolls, isn't it fun to go and see them? These are frightening documents. And documents with deep, deep significance for the study of this period. Let's go back to the community rule. So, to keep away from polluted evil riches, as James says, keep away from the pollution of the idols. And look at this here, line 17 of column 6. Keep away from the riches of the temple and robbing the poor of his people. The poor. But this is not the Ibyonim here. This is like the poor in the sense of being meek. And murdering orphans. These people are angry, aren't they? They're really angry. They're very angry at some establishment that they feel is doing horrible things. Rather to separate between polluted and pure and distinguish between holy and profane. Wow. That should knock your socks off. Why? Do you know a document that says just the opposite that we're all familiar with? What does Peter learn in the tablecloth vision in Acts? You people who know your Gospels and your New Testament. He learns the voice from heaven cries out, "Eat, Peter, eat." Don't worry about the pure food here. "Eat, Peter, eat." And the tablecloth, this is not historical, obviously. Tablecloth comes down, this is symbolic, this is polemics. Tablecloth comes down with all what the Jews have as forbidden foods, what the Jews call treif. And Peter said, "No, Lord, remember that? I have never eaten any unclean thing." How many are familiar with that passage in Scripture? Well, you should be. It's Acts, where can I find it? I can't find it. Oh, it's Acts 10:15 and 10:28. And then Peter, 3 times, just like Peter denies Jesus 3 times on his death night before the cock crows, and I told you, Peter, you would deny me 3 times before the cock crows, and Peter is humiliated. Poor Peter, he's always like a stumble bum in the Gospels, because the Gospels know that he didn't agree with Paul, actually. And Jesus is walking in the Sea of Galilee, and Peter wants to walk on the waters too. And then instead of walking, he sinks in the waters, and Jesus tells us, because your faith was weak. Who's the proponent of faith? Paul. That's why Peter sinks. You know, Peter misunderstands the Master's teaching in the Gospels constantly, even though we know he's the successor and the rock of the church or something, but he's all portrayed very negatively often. But no, forget all of that. That's what the book of Acts is involved in too. Peter says, "I have never eaten any unclean thing." Oh, you mean Peter didn't hear Jesus talk about the parable of the toilet bowl? Where what goes into the mouth is not important, it just goes down the drain and into the toilet bowl. What comes out of the mouth is important. And Jesus said these things, declaring all foods clean, says the Gospel. You mean Peter wasn't there when Jesus said these things? The book of Acts proves that Jesus never said those things.
Peter could lie, because Peter was already lying if you consider that he denied Jesus.
Well, I don't think Peter denied Jesus, but that's the portrait of him. I don't think Peter denied, but what I'm trying to say is, you think Peter's lying? I've never eaten any unclean thing there? No, the point of the thing is, let's get aside. What I'm trying to say is that one contradicts the other. If you prefer the Acts picture, gospel picture of Peter, fine. But all I'm just saying is that according to the gospel, Jesus regulated this issue. And Peter says, "I have never eaten any unclean thing" in the book of Acts. And what does he need? A Pauline vision. Don't forget, Paul is the teacher of apocalypsios, visions. He has visions. He needs a Pauline vision to convince him to do what? That he can eat. And so the voice from heaven says, "Eat, Peter, eat." 3 times or something like that. And then Peter says, "Okay, I now understand that I should not distinguish between holy and profane, that I shouldn't make distinctions between clean and unclean, or call any man unclean or any food unclean." I don't do the whole thing. That is the very opposite here. To separate between polluted and pure, to distinguish between holy and profane. So what Peter is learning in the book of Acts is the very opposite of this, which is fine. I'm not against that. I just want to show you how one relates to the other. For me, that's the only importance of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Otherwise, they have no importance at all. They're just, you might as well be reading Eskimo literature. Or something from, the Kalahari Desert. just an interesting survival. No, this is interesting because it shows us a different thing going on in Palestine than we knew about. And the rabbis didn't tell us about this, and so on. But now we see that part of going out into the wilderness is to learn to separate between holy and profane, and to keep the day of the Sabbath according to its precise letter, and the festivals that Paul heaps up use upon, and the day of fasting according to the commandments of those entering the new covenant in the land of Damascus. And what is the new covenant in the land of Damascus? To set up the holy things according to their precise specifications, and to love each man his brother as himself. Well, we know about that. That is in the letter of James. That's the royal law of Scripture. That is what Jesus says are the two basic commandments. Love your neighbor as yourself, and love God. And to strengthen the hand of the meek, the poor, Ibion, the convert, for each man to seek the welfare of his brother, and not to uncover the nakedness of near kin, to keep away from fornication. The only difference between this and James's instructions to overseas community in the book of Acts is James says keep away. No, James does say keep away from fornication. Sorry. This says keep away from exactly what James says pardon me, I'm sorry, is that they go into niece marriage here, but they aren't saying it here. To keep away from fornication. To keep away. And again, the verb is lehinazer. The Nazarite verb, the verb based on a Nazarite root. So to my mind, this is a community of Nazarites. Now maybe, as time went on, Nazarite got confused with Nazareth. I'm not sure, or Nazarene, because nobody knows the meaning of Nazarene yet. It's not a proper Greek usage, and it's not something that means from Nazareth. And don't forget, these are moving from Hebrew transliterations into Greek. To my mind, when he shall be called a Nazarite in the Gospels means that they're talking about a Nazarite person, and James is a Nazarite, and the leadership of the community are Nazarites, and this whole group is a Nazarite group living in the wilderness, separating holy from profane. Now, I'm not saying that they're right and what you and I know are wrong. I just want to know that they are. I just keep on and on here. To reprove each man his brother, line 7, column 7, according to the commandment, and to bear no rancor from day to day, to separate, again separate, from all pollutions according to the statute, and no man should defile his Holy Spirit, which God separated for them. Rather, all should walk in these things in perfect holiness. Paul uses the term perfection of holiness, as I read you last time, in 2 Corinthians 7:1. On the basis of the covenant of God in which they were instructed, faithfully promising them that they would live for 1,000 generations, etc., etc., etc. So if you do these things in the correct way, you're going to live, for 1,000 generations, forever, or something like that. So I can't take your question right now because I want to interrupt the flow of this, and that's just an aside comment. You don't agree with it, that's fair enough. You're supposed to have your own opinion. So I'm not trying to, I'm just setting forth a different opinion and throwing it out and saying, what do you think of that? Where have you heard that before? Peter. How come Peter never ate any unclean thing according to the book of Acts? I don't know, because the whole issue with Peter is table fellowship in Galatians. Is Peter going to keep table fellowship with Gentiles in Galatians? Or when the sum from James, those of the circumcision, come down in Galatians 2, is he going to withdraw or keep away from doing this? And Paul attacks him as a hypocrite. I don't have to read all that for the third time here. So I think all this relates to that. But let's go back to column 4. So now we know that column 4 relates to column 6. Column 6 just develops column 4 more. By the way, there is a quantity in column 6. We heard about the diggers and the nobles of the people. These are the penitents and so on. But there's another group, I think, who are called the we heard about the diggers and the princes. But the nobles of the people are a second group that I think that you will find probably is equivalent to the Nilvim here. Probably is equivalent to the Nilvim. The Nilvim where? The nobles of the people is a quote from Isaiah that's being played with in column 6. The N.T.will is a passage that's being played with in column 4. So go back to column 4. What are the N.T.will in column 4? They are the Levites in Ezekiel. Well, that's not really Levites, it's just that N.T.will uses the same root, LVI, as Levites. N.T.will is known, as I told you last time, and it means joiners. And what it means is Gentiles who have joined or attached themselves to the Jewish community, who are, let's say, God-fearers, as the New Testament calls them. I believe the nobles of the people. People in Hebrew is ethne in Greek. Paul is the apostle to the peoples, to the ethne, to the Gentiles. Gentiles in English is peoples in Greek. We get the word ethnic from that. The Romans called the peoples in the eastern part of the empire peoples. They were different from the Romans. And the kings at one point in Roman jurisprudence are called kings of the peoples. And we're going to hear about the kings of the peoples here in the Damascus Document. And I think those are the kings you get from Greece east in Asia Minor. You hear about the king of Cappadocia. You hear about the king of, I can't remember all these places. What's the area where what's the area? I can't remember the different places. But in any case, there are kings all the way up through Armenia, into Syria, minor kings. The Herodians are kings under Roman auspices. These are what the Romans would call peoples. So I think that allusion to the nobles of the people is another allusion to Gentiles who are in the community. That we're not just talking about native Jews here in this document. I have an article about that in this book here. I do believe we have non-Jews in this community, but Torah-doing non-Jews, as opposed to the Paul group, non-Torah-doing non-Jews. That's just, I believe that this N.T.will is definitely such a word, you see, and it says, the priests are those that went out from the land of Judah. See how deep all this is? And the joiners with them, the N.T.will. It doesn't say Levites with them, it says N.T.will. N.T.will is a play on Levite, but N.T.will means Gentiles who have joined the Jewish community in associated status, like the synagogues in Asia Minor that Paul is always visiting, which have Gentiles and Jews worshiping together. And the sons of Zadok are the elect of Israel, called by name, will stand up. Okay, we did all of that, and they justify the righteous and condemn the wicked, and so on and so forth. So by line 10 of column 4, and with the completion of the era of the number of these years, there will be no more joining to the house of Judah. Now later on here, we go out from the land of Judah. Now this is house of Judah. We're going to hear that expression, house of Judah, once again in the Habakkuk commentary. It's going to be very important. It's going to have to do with the interpretation of Habakkuk 2:4. How many know what Habakkuk 2:4 is? Habakkuk 2:4 in Christian theology with Genesis 15:6 are the two building blocks of Pauline theology. Genesis 15:6 is Abraham's faith was reckoned to him as righteousness. And the other one, Habakkuk 2:4, is the righteous shall live by their faith. Paul plays with those two passages in Romans and Galatians, and Jesus doesn't do it in the Gospels. Paul does it in Romans and Galatians and produces Christian theology as we know it. Now that word, house of Judah, will appear again, I don't want to spoil it for you, in the Habakkuk commentary, or Pesher, in the interpretation of Habakkuk 2:4, the righteous shall live by his faith. And we'll see what it means there, but the point is, in both contexts, here and in Habakkuk, the house of Judah relates to Jews. It's just a fancy way of saying Jews. Just that sort of, when you're using ancient language, old language, archaic speech. House of Judah. What's the house of Judah? Jews. They don't have a word for Jews. yet. They don't have the word that we have, or that Paul has, or the Romans have. They don't have any word yet for Jews. It's the house of Judah, because all the other houses have disappeared. In any case, and there will be no more joining to the house of Judah. What does that mean? Well, at the end, when all these things and the completion of the eras, there'll be no more Jews, you see. That's what that means. No more Jews as special. They're Gentiles and Jews all living together, but all following the law, I think. This is their ideology, sort of like Bin Laden, if you like, when we conquer all of you people. But I don't think these people are quite as violent as Bin Laden. They're not going to drop an atomic bomb in the middle of innocent people. Or suicide bomb innocent people just to make people look bad, things like that. I don't think that they're like that. I think that they are dedicated to a world of righteousness. And they think righteousness is through works of the law. Now there may be some secret materials that they're not communicating that we can't know that they speak about. Anyway, each man will stand on his own net. Now, I don't know if that is watchtower or net, because later on in the Habakkuk commentary, Habakkuk 2:1, there's a passage, stand upon your watchtower. And the difference in the Hebrew is one letter, one small letter. And it could just be a scribal error here. I haven't seen this in the column 4 parallels, so I can't tell if this is a scribal error or if this is stand on your own net or stand on your own watchtower.
The Vermes said watchtower.
Oh, he finally said watchtower? Well, so do I, you see.
England's a watchtower.
Huh?
England's a watchtower.
Who?
England.
Yeah.
England.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but when did he start saying that? I think he originally said, let's see if we can catch him up. Maybe he borrowed
What does
something.
that mean, he'll stand on his watchtower?
Huh?
What does that mean?
Well, wait a second, hold on, let's first find out. I don't know what it means, I'm not. Let's see, what is this column 4? There will be, according to, so therefore that will do, the majority of each man shall stand on, okay, he does say watchtower. Okay, so it is either watchtower or net here. The actual Hebrew reads net here. So I'm not sure if it's watchtower or net. If it means net, I would think it means on his own record. In other words, each man should be responsible for what he does. It doesn't matter where you come from or who you are. And I should think that probably watchtower means something similar, but I can't tell you what the secret meaning is. Okay? Okay. So let's see. And each man shall, let me see if we can get the actual Hebrew. What line is that? Because now I think you're making me feel bad here. 4:12. Let's look at the Hebrew here. That's why I gave the Hebrew. 4:12. Let's see. Pesher, let's see it. Oh. La'amod ish al mitsudo. Mitsudo is net. Mitsuro is watchtower. No, the opposite, pardon me. Mitsuro, no, I think I'm right. Mitsudo. Yeah, let me look at the Habakkuk commentary. Hold on. I think, let's see. Line 13 of column 6. I will stand upon my watchtower. Let's see, line 12 of column 6. Line 12 of column 6. Let's see. Well, I can't find it right now. It doesn't seem to pop out this Mitsuro or Mitsudo. But anyway, this is Mishmar T watchtower here. Mishmar. Yeah, Mitsudo is net, normally speaking, not watch. So it actually, Mitsudo is net. You can look it up in a dictionary. Not normally a watchtower, but I don't know which it is. I say I give a footnote on that. Anyway, the fence is built, the law is far removed, it's not so important. In all these years, Belial was sent against Israel as God foretold by the hand of his prophet Isaiah, the son of Amos, and so on. So here we have Belial introduced for the first time. Interpreters of this concerns the three nets of Belial, we talked about that last time, about which Levi the son of Jacob spoke. That would be in a document that is an apocryphal document called the Testaments of the 12 Patriarchs. That would be in the Testament of Levi, and apparently they know this document, the Testament of Levi. So by means of which he catches Israel, transforming these things before them into three kinds of righteousness. The first is fornication, the second is riches, and the third is pollution of the temple. Now, fornication, we've been talking about. Riches, you can say about any establishment. The third is pollution of the temple. Who is polluting the temple? The Herodian, the Maccabees, or the Herodians? Well, that's what we're going to find out. Can we really say the Maccabees are polluting the temple, or is it back to the time of Alexander the Great? I don't think that's what this is. Anyway, watch this. This is another dating parameter, I believe. He who escapes the first is caught in the second, and he who eludes the second is caught in the third. The builders of the wall, again, that is Ezekiel 13:10, and it's repeated in columns 6 and 8 again below in this document, who followed Zorzor. This is real weird stuff, but it's paralleled in the cave formative. So-and-so, you might say, who followed so-and-so. They don't want to name who in. He is the spouter. Now, the spouter will appear again in the document, like the Habakkuk commentary, as the man of lies is the spouter of lies. The beginning of this document, the man who poured over Israel the waters of lying, the spouter of lies. He is the spouter. The builders of the wall followed so-and-so, about whom was said, he shall surely spout, Micah 2:6. Anyway, these people are caught in two of these. Why are they fornicating? Because they take two wives in their lifetimes. So this document, like Christianity later, or to follow, believes in one wife only. At least for the rulers. And most Jews, I think, didn't practice polygamy at this time. One wife only. Whereas the foundation of creation is male and female, he created them, Genesis. Now, 1:27, etc. And they also, quote, 2 by 2 they went into the ark, Genesis 7:9. Now, I don't think that's a particularly strong argument. It's grasping at straws, but it's the best this community can do. In any case, it's attacking people who don't just marry one wife. Now, there's no indication that the Maccabees married more than one wife, very often, if at all. But the Herodians, many of them married more than one wife. And the Temple Scroll, another document that I told you was found from Cave 11 after the 6-Day War, they went to this house in Bethlehem and they found it, says, the king shall marry one wife and one wife only during his life, and she shall be a Jewish woman. Even goes further than this. Now, Herod married 10 wives. And very few of them were Jewish women, only 2 Jewish women that I can count. And you give the genealogies in the back of my books and other books. The only 2 Jewish women that you'll find there are the 2 Miriams, the daughters of the high priest that he married. One, the Maccabean Miriam, whom he killed, and the other, the Miriam, the Boethus, who he brought from Egypt, the priesthood he brought in from Egypt to take the place of the Maccabees. Her, the daughter of that priest. So, to my mind, I mean, maybe this is not attacking anyone, but it's certainly attacking somebody who's not doing this. And as for the ruler, it says, line column 1, 5:1. He shall not multiply wives unto himself. So it agrees with the temple scroll again. And again, who's multiplying wives unto himself? Herod. I just put this right in the Herodian period. The three nets of Belial are the things Herod and his people are doing in Palestine. They don't name them because they're frightened of them. Now, I can't prove this because this stuff is so recondite and opaque, purposely vague, that nobody can be, punished for this, really. It's not naming people in the present time. It has code. It's written in code. But if you know it, you can. Now look at how they get David off. In MMT, the famous letter from Qumran, also speaks about David in this manner. But here, it knows David multiplied wives to himself, yet they love David. How do they get around this? You see, these people are not dumb. They know when they're in trouble ideologically and polemically. He had not read, they say, the book of the Torah that had been sealed, which was in the ark. Probably, in the Bible, the book of Deuteronomy is supposed to have been found in the 600s in the ark, in the covenant, in the temple by a priest, and nobody knows where it came from. And they're probably referring to that. In any case, or he didn't read our literature, they're saying. Since it was not open in Israel from the day of the deaths of Eleazar and Joshua, and the elders who served Ashtar and all those wicked things they did, and they hid it, and it was not revealed until Zadok arose, or stood up. We don't know who the Zadok is here, or what. If it's a symbol, if it's a term, if it's a person, if it means righteous one, or if it's just a name. So David's high priest was Zadok, but it's not that Zadok. But here's how they get around it. And the works of David rose up. That means rose up in his favor, except for the blood of Uriah. They blame him for that. How many know the Bible? David took Uriah from the battlefront. Uriah the Hittite, he shouldn't have done that. He wanted Bathsheba. He's seen her bathing on the rooftop. Brought Uriah up there. Uriah was really a good man. He wouldn't even go in and cohabit with his wife because in the battlefield, they were following the holy war rules, the rules of total purity. We'll have it in the war scroll here, even back in that time. They're pictured as following that kind of regimen, even though Uriah is supposed to not be even a Jew, but he's adopted the Jewish lifestyle, obviously. Many of David's champions are not Jewish, as it turns out. In any case, that's 10th century. Except for the blood of, the good works of David are clear, except for the blood of Uriah. And God counted them to him. God reckoned these good works for him. So they are not going to judge David. And the MMT says, let God judge David. The letter picks up this theme again and says, let God judge David. We're not going to judge him. God counted his good works to him, and that's all we're going to say, except for Uriah. And he hadn't read about forbidding multiplying wives, they're saying. So he didn't have it. Anyway. And they, that is the builders of the wall we've been talking about, where we started talking about them way back in, where was that, 919. And they also pollute the temple because they do not separate as per the Torah, or as prescribed by Torah, that is, clean from unclean in the temple. But they lie with a woman during the blood of her period. They sleep with women in their periods. Again, the blood issue. And each man, that is a matter of routine, takes the daughter of his brother and the daughter of his sister to wife. That means each man marries his niece. That is the tip-off. That's what the Herodian family policy was. And all you have to do is look at the Herodian genealogies, and you can see that, for instance, take a case like the famous Herodias and her two husbands. There's all kinds of infractions there of Qumran ideology. Okay, the New Testament presents John as objecting on some obscure basis of Levirate marriage, but that's not what all the infractions were. The infractions there are divorce. The infractions there are marrying uncles. She didn't just marry one uncle, she married two uncles. So tell me, is this an attack, if it is an attack, on the Herodians or the Maccabees? And is this 1st century AD or 2nd century BC? That is our question to answer. And I say, on the basis of internal data, over and over and over again, we're getting into the 1st century AD, particularly on this issue of multiplying wives to themselves and niece marriage. Now, niece marriage is not an issue in the New Testament. Rabbinic Judaism still permits niece marriage. This is a new movement, anti-Herodian movement. In the Talmud, one of the Herodian kings, the king was supposed to read the Deuteronomic king law in the temple, I think, every Shavuot. And Agrippa I, who we didn't get to because we didn't read our Josephus that far, in the Talmud starts crying because he's reading it and he starts crying because he's supposed to be one of the good Herodian kings if there was one. He has Maccabean blood. He's the grandchild of Miriam, the Herodian wife, the Maccabean wife that Herod killed. So they really honor him, I think, for that Maccabean blood. In any case, he starts crying because it says, "Thou shalt not put a foreigner over you." And he knows that they consider him to be a foreigner because of his Herodian blood. That's why he's crying. And they say, "You are one of us. Don't cry, Agrippa. You are one of us. You are one of us. You are one of us." It's in the Talmud. I think it's probably an actual historical episode. The point is that the Pharisees, to whom the Talmud basically appertain, are cooperating with the Herodians. The Pharisee fathers, Hillel and Shammai, are recognizing Herod, according to Josephus, if the two men who recognize, who are the chiefs of the Pharisees, who recognize Herod as a future king in the Antiquities and in the war, are they're called Polio and Sameas. That's very likely Hillel and Shammai, the two L's of the tip-off in Polio, and Sameas is certainly Shammai. And the Antiquities tells us that only those two survived of the Sanhedrin that wanted to execute Herod for what he did in Galilee to the bandit chief in the 50 BC period, Hezekiah, who executed him illegally. All the rest of the Sanhedrin, when Herod took power, when the Romans stormed the temple in 37 BC, the Roman troops that Antony had given him, all the rest of the Sanhedrin was done away with, and the Pharisees took over. The Pharisees were the party willing to live with the Herodians, the chief from the Pharisees. I can read it to you in your Josephus books. This group is not willing to live with the Herodians. So let's finish up there. They're combining pollution of the temple with fornication. See, they do not separate as prescribed by Torah in the temple, but rather they lie with a woman during the blood of her period, and each man takes the daughter of his brother and daughter of his sister to wife. But Moses said, "You should not approach your mother's sister. She is your mother's near kin." So now they want to move from there. But while the law of incest is written for males, it likewise applies to females. Therefore, if the daughter of a brother uncovers the nakedness of the brother of her father, he is near kin. And they pollute their, and so on and so forth. They pollute their Holy Spirit. They open their mouth with a tongue full of insults against the laws of the covenant of God, saying they are not certain. They speak an abomination concerning them. All of them are kindlers of the fire, the way John speaks of the fire is in the flame, and the I forget, the fan is ready for the burning, or what or the chaff is ready for the burning. Forget how it presents John. All of them are kindlers of fire and lighters of firebrands, quoting Isaiah. Their webs are spiders' webs, their eggs of vipers are their eggs. O generation of vipers. the New Testament starts out with John speaking in that way. Who told you to flee the end, or whatever it is he says in his first speech attacking the scribes and the Pharisees who come out to him. But look at this. Whoever approaches them cannot be clean. Like an accursed thing, his house is guilty unless he was forced. So here's the thing. It isn't the actual priests who are doing this. It's Herodians who are doing this. But the priests are taking their appointment from Roman governors and Herodian kings. After the Herodian kingship, I didn't get a chance to read you all that in Josephus, is abolished in between 4 BC to 7 AD, the Romans imposed direct rule, which is why they do the census of Cyrenius in 7 AD. So what this document is saying is that if you approach them, if you have anything to do with them, you acquire their pollution. So the priests aren't sleeping with women and their parents. What's happening is the priests are accepting gifts from Herodians and other foreigners in the temple in an illicit way, and we hear about that in Josephus. All that is easily explained in the first century period living up to the war against Rome. And the whole basis of the war against Rome as it finally breaks out, which is why I had you read your Josephus, but I haven't had a chance to go through it the way I would like to. The whole basis of the war against Rome, Josephus makes it clear, is that they reject sacrifices from the emperor and from non-Jews in the temple. The zealots do, the revolutionaries do. And that causes the outbreak of the war. And Josephus portrays himself and also people like Agrippa II, the son of this Agrippa one I just mentioned, and others, telling them that, oh, you're doing things that our ancestors never did. Our ancestors accepted gifts in the temple from Gentiles. And so Josephus calls these people who are rejecting these things innovators. Here is the literature of the innovators right here. These are the people who are rejecting this kind of thing as polluted. That's why you find a copper scroll among the Dead Sea Scrolls. Let's just finish this column, then we'll have a break. Whoever approaches them cannot be cleansed. Like an accursed thing, his house is guilty, unless he was forced. Okay, if you were forced, if you went to prison, if you had to go to Rome as a prisoner, whatever, okay, we're not going to blame you. For in former time, here we go again, God visited their works, second use of visitation. But now it's visited them not for good, but for wrath. And his wrath was kindled by their actions. And former times Moses stood up along with Aaron by the hand of the Prince of Lights, while Belial in his guilefulness raised up Yannes and Yambre and his brother at the time of the first salvation of Israel. That's out in the Exodus period. And in the era of desolation of the land, the removers of the bound stood up and led Israel astray. The removers of the bound are this man who pours lime, who removes the boundary. The removers of the bound are leading Israel astray, and the land is decimated because they spoke rebellion against the commandments of God as given by the hand of Moses, and also against his holy Messiah. Now, the usage here is singular. It is not plural. Translators translate it as plural because they can't understand. I think Vermes has his holy anointed ones, but that is not what is it. Moshicho is, you know, if it were plural, it would be a different pronomial at the end. It's his holy. I don't know what it means, but it is singular. Our translators don't want to give you the word Messiah and don't even want to tell you that it's singular. They want it to be his holy anointed one so that you don't know what's going on here. I mean, I don't know what's going on here, but I know that their translations are incorrect. And I think they're incorrect for psychological reasons of their own, because they just can't admit what they're seeing here in front of them. And it upsets them, so they change it. But God, they prophesied lying to turn Israel from God. See, the liars are the daubers on the wall. It's in Ezekiel it's a passage in Ezekiel where they cry peace, but there is no peace. And these are the daubers on the wall that we're going to hear about again. They prophesied lying to turn Israel aside from God. But God remembered the covenant of the first. There's that grace. And he raised up from Aaron men of discernment and made them listen. And they dug the well. The well was the prince's dug. That's where we picked up last time, or earlier. Take a break here. See you in 10 minutes. Still not where I want to get to, but we're getting there. This is a wild document, as you see.